Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to get everybody started. Welcome to our class, our session today at the Fall Institute here for Georgia HFMA. And we're going to be talking about two sessions here that are kind of linked, two items that are highly important to how we look at our future in healthcare. And the items are cybersecurity and then revenue cycle technology. And how do those two connect together? How important are they? What's our lens? What's our future and current state? So I have two colleagues that I wanted to introduce today as we go through the agenda, which is listed here. We're going to start with cybersecurity this morning. And with that, we've got a couple of two speakers here that are joining me on this presentation. Let me go ahead and introduce Kempton Smith and then Scott.
Scott, hi.
So Kempton is the Vice President of Hospitals and Partnerships for Atrium Health. Atrium has a footprint both in the Carolinas as well as in Georgia, specifically around the Macon area and Navicent. Kempton, when he begins to speak, can give a little bit more background for him. And then Scott Ruthie is actually with us. He is a VP for security here at Waystar, which I'm a part of as well, and I serve as a solution strategist for the hospital and health system commercialization team. So as we begin, we're going to go ahead and begin with cybersecurity. I'll kick this over to Scott.
Okay. So to start things off, I wanted to talk a little bit about why are we worried about the cybersecurity. The big things in the news lately have been a lot of focus on ransomware. If you look, we've got a series of articles here that kind of explain why we're worried about it right now. The first article in there talks a little bit about the effects that ransomware has been having on institutions as they've been getting infected. Most people realize right off the bat that that's going to shut down the operations. Most of your stuff's going to be moving over to a manual process. Now, the secondary effects of that manual is it slows everything down. So first off, you start having a need to divert patients, and these other articles start talking about the diversions has been having a great effect on when you divert somebody, you start adding time to their case. So if you start talking about a hospital case that's going in for heart or something like that where it's critical, then you're starting to see an increase in mortality rates that are registered now based on the ransomware. And these articles start stating that you're seeing up to a 20% increase in mortality based on the ransomware attack, and they can directly attribute that to it. A lot of news has been coming out lately with different cases that are directly attributable. I was just talking a few minutes ago with somebody. The middle article talks about a patient that was in delivery and the ransomware hit. Took down all the systems, they lost their equipment to monitor the case, and during delivery the fetus had an umbilical cord wrapped around it, so they lost the baby. And so now that's gone into a court case based on that, but that's directly attributable to the ransomware. And there's been many more now that are coming out across the country that are directly attributable to that ransomware. The big things in the first article that I thought were really key that people need to notice were, the first thing is that the Poinmont study they quote says that 15% of healthcare organizations are prepared to manage the attack. That means 85% are not prepared to be managing an attack against them at any time. So that's a huge number that says we need to step that game up. The second number in that article was health systems tend to spend 4 to 7% of their budget on cybersecurity, whereas banking now spends 3 times that. So I've done time in banking, I've done time in healthcare. So when I was in banking, I was doing 18 to 21% was coming out as our budget for where that's going to be. When I go in and talk to the board and we discuss where we're going to start, the starting point is usually at 10%, and then it goes down for healthcare, it went up for banking. So That's a huge investment difference between the two groups based on that, and you'll see that played out through all of the different articles. The third article on that one, again, represented the fact that the effect it had on the patients, and the one was ransomware breaches have doubled in 2020, and they're becoming even more if you're looking at 2021. So they're coming at you faster and faster at this point. One article quoted that there was every year 40 to 45% of institutions are attacked via ransomware or a hacker attack. So if you think about that, 45% per year, somebody's going to be affected. You will be affected at some point. It's not are you going to be affected? It's how are you going to be affected? When are you going to be affected? And are you prepared to meet that? So to me, that's a huge thing as to what's the major things you need to look at. So if we look at that, what can we do about it? The first one is the OCR just put out some guidance recently on what you should do to prepare for malware or ransomware. In that briefing that they gave out, they had some points. So their points are up there. So let's start with those and talk about them a little bit. So the first one that they talked about was back up your data. Now, in that they had 3 points, right? Back up your data, test them, and keep your backups offline, right? So if you aren't testing them, you don't know if you can recover from them. And the keep it offline is a key point. If you look at most companies nowadays, they've moved to a process where they're replicating data someplace, but they're not making an offline copy that they can come back to. When you do that and you get infected, you replicate the infection. And so your copies or your backups are now infected at the same time. You have no real defense for it at that point. So that's a huge piece of it. The bottom bullet they had on that was segment your networks. If you're not segmenting your network, we traditionally call it blast zones, right? When you get infected, you want that to be restricted to the smallest area you can and not have it go from place to place to place. So is it going to connect up between different buildings or hospitals within your group? Is it going to be restricted to one small area? Healthcare has a bigger problem with old gear, really old equipment, old test equipment things that are easily infected because they never had security put in the first place. There was a lot of demonstrations at Black Hat, which is a hacker conference all the security guys like to go to and see the cool stuff. So there was a guy that used to present there, Barnaby Jack. Barnaby Jack came out, made his big name by hacking in ATMs and making the ATMs spit money across the stage, right? So he did that the first year. Then he started coming in with a car, and he hacked a car while it's driving down the road and making the wipers go, making the brakes go. Then he started coming into healthcare, and he started getting into implantable devices and the test equipment, things like that, and showing how he could hack into insulin pumps, he could hack into pacemakers, things like this in closed environments. So how do you protect that and isolate those out? That isolation of the network is huge at that point. And if you don't do that isolation, you're just going to get one infection and it spreads everywhere and the complete place shuts down. So how do we stop that? So again, follow the steps from the ransomware guidance from the OCR. But one of the guidance that I was surprised at was you start looking around the vendors that you work with. Vendors have a huge impact on that. If you look at the OCR breach, you know, the wall of shame, go down through that, look at the numbers. 40% of all breaches over the last couple years involves a BAA, right? With that BAA, if you look at the true numbers underneath that, everyone with a BAA, you average twice as many patients affected in the breach than you had if you didn't have a BAA involved. So that means that all of the ones that use the vendors have a much bigger impact than you would have gotten normally just doing it by yourself. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So if you want to think about that, we protect ourselves by doing vendor reviews. And your vendor reviews, you do them twice, right? You do one when you bring that vendor on. You're doing it as part of the purchasing process. Then you need to come back once a year, once every 2 years, something like that, and you review those vendors and you go through that. What do you want to do when you look at those vendors? The first thing you want to do is make sure they're a good partner. Are they working with you the way that you should be, right? Are they partnering with you to do things and shut things down? We tend to plan our shutdown activity if they get infected or we get infected. Again, back to that segmentation, we want to block those things from happening. So we actually plan with each of those vendors when we bring them online. We plan to shut them down when they report that they've been infected with ransomware, so we don't get the infection transmitted to us and we don't transmit it to anyone else. And then when they're clear of their virus or report that they've cleaned everything up, then we'll bring all those connections back up. But in order to do it quickly, we've actually got the plan for each one of them. We know what the ports are, we know what the connections are, we know all the different communications we've got between those vendors documented out. We bring up the list, shut them down as quick as we can, and block that from happening to keep everybody safe. So remember to plan for that when you get the shot. The other thing you want to do is when you're doing that review, make sure you're doing the actual minimum necessary. The data that you share with them, it should be the minimum that you actually need to share with them for the business that they're doing for you. There's a tendency, because it's IT, it's the easy thing to do, you'll share a blanket thing. They have full access to get everything that they need. That's too much data, and then when something happens, you've got a much bigger breach than you would have had if you would have actually planned that out and limited the data, make sure they clean up after themselves, all that kind of stuff. So make sure that you keep that down so that it's the minimum necessary when you do that sharing. And if they're a good partner, they should be working with you to do that. You know, they should be telling you what they can and can't do, how they should limit it. So keep that in mind when you work with them. So where are we going in the future? So if you look going in the future, there's a few things that are coming up. I don't know if many of you paid attention. Back in May, the president put out an executive order on cybersecurity. In that executive order, he made a whole bunch of statements that were really good. But one of them that was of particular note that I thought was, in the contracts now, he's directed all of the government agencies to go towards zero trust. Now there's a zero trust that is industry zero trust, and then there's the government's version of zero trust. NIST put out a standard on it. They're different, so focus on the one for government. But expect, as we're moving forward, that in your contracts, you're doing Medicaid, Medicare, CMS, those contracts are now going to have requirements. They're going to have zero trust coming in them as a requirement. You need to be able to demonstrate your compliance with zero trust. So it's a good thing to do, so it's a good thing to move forward, right? He moved forward with cloud security services, things, software chain, and now that's based on the SolarWinds attack that happened earlier this year. So everybody saw that thing. They hacked their way into SolarWinds. They embedded their malware into the SolarWinds product, and then it got deployed to everybody that had SolarWinds. So that's called a supply chain attack. So they're focusing on those supply chain attacks. Now, as we look at that going forward, what are we doing as an industry to correct some of those things? The first thing is there's a certification in the finance industry. They got together and they came up with their own certification called PCI, or Payment Card Industry Certification. So when you'd use your Visa cards, your American Express, they have a certification that they came up with, and they did it for themselves to stop government from regulating some of their stuff. So that's now an industry standard. Everybody complies with that in the finance world. On the medical side, there's one called High Trust that's coming up. It's a big push that's coming forward. A lot of contracts are starting to requirement, and I think it's a good differentiator for what's going on. The reason I'm putting it as it's coming up in the future, 2022 and moving forward, they grew a little fast for themselves. So right now there's a waiting list when you submit your documentation. If you're going to require it of your vendors, you have to realize it's going to take them a few months to actually get the certification out of High Trust, just because the High Trust company can't keep up with themselves anymore. But it's a great certification, it's a good differentiator, and work with the vendor to make sure that he's moving towards that is a great way to help differentiate things and it very equivalent to the PCI standard. They copied a lot of things going back and forth from that. Going farther future, some of the other things that you're going to start seeing are there are commercial monitoring services out there. There's already been companies like Coral and these where they'll go do a vendor review for you, but they just send out these questionnaires. They work through the BITS FISAP, that kind of stuff. That's very easy, answer a bunch of questions, and they clear them and say that's what they're doing. The new companies that are coming up are treating it like BitSite, for example, compares themselves very much to a credit score. When you look at the security score for that company, they're trying very hard to make it just like the finance industry. When you talk about a company and they're doing Sarbanes-Oxley and you have all this transparency about what's going on, that's what the BITS FISAP is starting to head towards. And you're starting to see more copy them, so security scorecard, other ones. All of these are very good metrics that are monitored on a daily basis. You sign up with them and they give you a very good scorecard of everything that you can see about that company from the outside. And you can tell whether they're keeping up with their security or they're not. And they get a very, in their case, it's very much on a score like a credit score. Their 850 is the highest you can go, 700 something is really good. You know, if you're looking at 750, you're up in the green, you're advanced. So these scores, you can get a very good comparison. They rank them against others, and you can see multiple companies when you do that and get a comparison of how these companies are doing. So it gives you a very good way to equate back and forth as to which ones are good, which ones are bad, which ones should you be working with, and are you getting transparency out of that vendor?
Thank you, Scott. One of the things that, you know, again, as we talk about high trust, something that is a big investment for an organization as a partnership, and something that, you know, here at Waystar, we invested in. And so earlier this year, around April, we actually attained that high trust certification. So as you think about, you know, going forward in that exposure of risk, there's a lot of people out there that are trying to consolidate their data connections. There was a big article earlier this year from Intermountain just talking about the magnitude of the data connections they have and how insurmountable it almost was to get their arms around all those data connections and manage them properly. I'm going to turn this over to Kempton. He's got a kind of an event that happened with them as Atrium, and then we're going to jump right into revenue cycle.
Can you guys hear me okay? Hey, something about last night, I lost some of my voice. Y'all might know something about that. If you find it, let me know. So I'm with Atrium Healthcare, and I'm in the revenue cycle space, as some of you know. And I've been working down at Navicent, my role with Atrium is bringing organizations in as we evolve or assimilate Atrium into a single business office concept. Revenue cycle from anywhere for anywhere. And that creates a lot of data sharing and therefore a lot of risk. Now, some of you know, who might recall that not so long ago, Atrium had a pretty bad experience with a breach. And it affected 2.6 million patients of ours. And 700,000 of those patients may have had their Social Security numbers involved. As you might guess, our senior team and our marketing team has taken a great interest in what we're doing to protect our consumers' data. What happened for us was we outsourced product functions, and I'll go ahead and, I won't say a vendor's name, but we outsourced our statements and database to support portal and activities that we were doing with our statements to a vendor who then subcontracted with another vendor who left a firewall open, and that firewall was exposed for a period of time, and we know that someone from a European country went into that database. We do not know, they were unable to, to withdraw massive amounts of data, but they may have done some screen review of individuals and captured information. That was an unpleasant experience. we're not going to repeat that experience. We have a data governance program that we worked through to make that was described just a few minutes ago, that we use to make sure, A, that we're providing the minimum necessary data, B, that we don't share that data beyond certain parts of our relationship with our vendor, and C, that if our vendors have subcontractor relationships, we're aware of those, and that those subcontractor relationships fall under the same data governance that our vendor does. In this particular case, some might say, well, did you get a new statement vendor? Well, the answer is actually no, because at the time this breach occurred, that vendor was following the state of the art and doing what they were supposed to do. Which brings me to the final point I want to mention about the data governance piece that Scott also touched on, and that is it's always evolving. Technology industry is changing very rapidly, obviously, but we as an organization, we're not necessarily reviewing on an annual or quarterly basis what we were sending, how we were sending it, what it was used for, whether it had changed. And so that was a game changer for us. So we have an ongoing program that is also evolving along with the data industry. So that's a little bit about our experience. If we have time at the end, we'll talk a little bit more about the breach or any deal with any questions you might have. So our next area, I wanted to just give you a real quick feel for those of you not familiar with Atrium, and let me see if one more. Okay. So Atrium's a big organization, and we have. Is anybody from Floyd in the audience today? Okay. So Navicent is in Georgia, and now Floyd is migrating in with us as well. And so this is about the size we'll be after Floyd comes in, because we got one going out in North Carolina. But we're a $12.4 billion organization. So as we go through some of the things that we're going to talk about today, some of the things we've experimented with, we've got a lot of tools and a lot of resources that some other organizations may not have, and somebody said you grow your own lunch, and we do have that opportunity that some folks don't have. But anyway, I won't go into all the numbers, but I have to keep remembering this is not connected. Okay, so our approach has been to try to get to better collections at lower cost using smart data, smart outsourcing, and enhanced patient engagement, much like those of you who were in the previous session with the presentation on what's going on there. We are sort of in that same space. We're trying to make it very easy for our patients to do things, but we're fighting this fear of leaking data and having another breach. And so, but when you look at, is the juice worth the squeeze, or whatever salesy kind of comment you want to put here, for Navicent Healthcare, going from what they had been doing with Sorient, with the computer systems and technologies that were there, getting on the Atrium platform and doing what Atrium has been doing with its mix of vendors and technologies, it's going to save about $22.5 million per year in just revenue cycle expense space alone. Revenue cycle collections improvement and expense reductions. So it's a big opportunity. So it's something we obviously have to look at. So looking a little bit deeper, what are some of these things that we do with data? And so if I look at the smart data piece, you'll hear me refer to the different models. The first model is I'm a boomer, I'd call it the Nodos model. You're not going to sleep tonight when you think through the data relationships you're going to have. What is it, Red Bull now? So maybe this is the Red Bull model if you don't know what Nodos is. What we're doing is we're working with different data elements and going out to vendors and saying, we need a propensity to pay score, we need a presumptive eligibility score, because we want to do things with these to automate the process and make it run a little better. For example, if we Maybe I'm still orange. Let's see what we got here. There we go. So,
You went through a couple.
yeah, did I? Okay, let's go back. Sorry, guys. There we go. So if we're looking at the propensity to pay and presumptive eligibility, what we're doing is trying to share the data, get back a score, and then change the process to make it more efficient. And so we're ending up getting the propensity to pay score, changing the statement activity, changing the communication timeline, changing the, potentially changing how the vendors that we use to support our technology or support our collections efforts are contacting the patients. So it's really a whole change in blend, and we're in a place now where we can pilot things and see how they work and work with them in different communities and see how the results work out and then make adjustments. So it's very effective for us, but again, it's a big saver for us in that we have lower cost of bad debt and we have lower cost of the work being done because we're automating much more of it. Under the presumptive eligibility space, we get that score, and if the patient is eligible and they meet the criteria, we're checking the night of registration. We don't want to send a statement to somebody that's not going to have to pay anything. We would much rather send them the required letter that says you're eligible, and by the way, we have these other services available. Now we've taken care of your account. If there's a copay because it was an ER visit, we'll send them a statement for that. But most of our outpatient diagnostics, and we've written our financial assistance policies around these technologies and around the regulations so we can minimize the cost. Okay, I am now in the smart outsourcing space. You know, we talked about the Nodos. This is the nausea model. Nodos was we're sending stuff out and we're getting stuff back, and it's a direct relationship back and forth. Now we're getting into some other details, more information about patients, more details about their visits, and it's enough to obviously, okay, you get it, it's going to make somebody sick because they're thinking about it and worrying about it too much. But what we wanted to do here, and you know, we've got a third-party liability group, we've got statement production that we do, we got workers' comp, estates, and secondary bad debts. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Well, we have found that for us and for the people that we have and the training that we've been able to do, that at least for a period of time, we need to have support doing things like third-party liability. We need to have support in workers' comp and in estates. And so we reach out to other vendors to help us with that. Secondary bad debt is one that Navicent hadn't done, and I'll just share that this one alone has been a net $2.6 million improvement in 1 year for Navicent. These were accounts that were full cycle from our existing vendor, great vendor that we're working with as primary, but that second conversation from another organization tends to have a positive impact on those patients, and we're seeing some real money coming in from those. So those are big deals. So is that worth the money? Yeah, I think so. Estates also, huge win for us. Something we thought we were doing pretty well. National databases lead to better data. Okay, I got ahead of my slides a little bit. I think I covered everything there. Rules engines are helping us make these assignments. So you got yet another vendor getting involved there. So you got a vendor who's deciding when another vendor is going to get files. So that's where the nausea really begins to kick in. So finally, we look at patient engagement. So here, we're going to let the patients be way more engaged with the model. They can dial in at their time of choosing. They can do the work they want to do. They can update their own insurance information. They can complete their own registration, do the arrival, do what they want to do when they want to do it. And hopefully we're going to get all the information that we need. And that's what keeps, this is, by the way, I've said the Nodos model, the nausea model, this would be the substance abuse model, because it takes a little something to help you tolerate this when you're going through it. But with this, we've got IVRs, we've got all the different routing going on, we've got the patient choosing when they do what they do, and we are evolving this further. Now, this is something, you know, everything above the last line there is stuff that Atrium is already doing. The last line is something that I want to do that I hadn't sold Atrium yet. And that is adding to the patient's experience the ability, I mean, they can obviously go on the phone now and access the patient portal and do what we want to do to schedule an appointment or those kinds of things. I want to take it a step further so that we've got a healthcare wallet in here. And when the patient walks through the doors at one of our facilities, it says, "Oh, Kempton, are you here for your radiology appointment at 2 o'clock today?" Yes. Would you like, we're going to arrive you now. Would you like guidance to get to the radiology department? You know, everything's been completed. Would you like guidance to get to the department? Sure. By the way, you're going to owe $550 as your copay or your portion for this. Would you like to put this on your HSA account in the healthcare wallet? Sure. If I said no, would you like a financial counselor to meet with you in the waiting area of the radiology space? Yes. Takes a picture of me, turns on the GPS on the phone, sends that to the financial counselor that accepts it, and the financial counselor goes to meet with the patient in that space. So, not approved to do that yet. I have seen it in an area that, or in a technology development area where they've proven it can be done. And so this is sort of after we get done with Epic, after we get done with the technology implementations that we're doing, that's sort of the next thing on the drawing board. But why do it? Why do all this? The engagement with the patient is one of the biggest things we've seen that helps reduce the cost to collect. When they can go on our portal and self-select to refer a loan to our patient lending program, when they can go on the portal and provide us with information, when they can start a chat with a customer service representative online, because that's what they prefer to do while they're working from home for your organization. We want to be able to fulfill what the patient wants to do. We want to supply every possible way to engage the patient. We have proven that that leads to higher collections percentages. So when the IT people or the data security people or the privacy officer come around the corner and say, "You had a breach, what are you doing to prevent it in the future?" I have to know what's going on. I have to rely on Scott. I have to rely on my vendors to do those things that have to happen to make that work. So I probably ate too far into your time.
No, obviously. Very good.
So let's see, I'll pass that back to you. And
great. Thank you. And so we want to leave some time at the end, so be thinking about questions you have for Kempton or for Scott. But one of the things we want to do is level set real quick. There's 3 technologies that have been deployed by Atrium. And when you look at that number, that reduction of cost to collect that they've realized in their Charlotte market and their Carolinas market, and what they're now been driving toward with the Georgia market, it was reflecting a 63% reduction in cost to collect. That's pretty big. And the reason why is because they were able to take care of a couple of technologies. First off, automation is a big deal. RPA is the replacement name for automation, robotic process automation, bots, things like that. It's being able to really address repetitive human activity through an automation process. Yesterday afternoon, we heard from a lot of people, 4 organizations that were struggling with staffing. I can tell you right now that I've had conversations with directors of revenue cycle teams that have lost not only just workforce people because of COVID as far as being ill, they've lost them because they've not been vaccinated, or challenges around that mechanism. or burnout or other things that are occurring. So we moved from an area in the beginning of COVID where we decentralized a lot of our functions that we had centralized, and sometimes we had more people than we had work for. Now we actually have more work than we have people for. And the answer to that question is automation, machine learning, and AI. And I'll tell you that for me, on my own personal career, I recognize that COVID was a catalyst that made a change in the direction of technology. And from someone that had a career of 14 years in a professional services consulting firm, I raised my hand personally and said it was important for me to actually be a part of this technology because it was the mechanism that would retain hospital margins. So when you think about this particular slide, the bottom one on the very bottom was actually just came out in September, August. And it talked about that there's a change in 2020 that occurred from 2019 where a 20.2% reduction in operating margin has occurred. That's erasing many times the marginal profit margin that many of the health systems had. It just took it off the table. And so now you think about how are we going to sustain ourselves from a margin perspective. You know, right now we look at that quote on the left and we say, there's no way it's $950 or $935 billion in waste, but every one of you know the time invested it takes for prior authorization alone. The American Medical Association estimated that for each physician per week, they have to submit 40 authorizations. That takes 2 days, 16 hours per FTE to submit those authorizations. What an incredible burden that is. Then you go to the hospital side, right? You start to look at the hospital. Well, they have to retrieve those statuses for most, and they have to review on a rule set, is there an authorization required? Can you replace it with automation? Yes. Something organizations like Waystar have been doing for more than 12 years. So as you think about just a single point of contact and context within your revenue cycle, automation is here. What about claim statusing? What about cash reconciliation? What about all the things you think about, you just go, are they candidates for automation? And one of the things that has recognized this is when we think about the reduction in cost to collect that Kempton's talked about, they put in place a lot of these advanced technologies, machine learning, AI, and RPA. Do you want to make any comments?
Yeah, I was just going to underscore on the authorization piece. One of the pieces that I meant to highlight that I didn't is we are piloting in the Macon market an authorization hub approach, where when the physician schedules something, it automatically triggers the information needed for the authorization to occur. It sends the data into the payer's website. It returns the authorization number. It stores that authorization in our host system. If there is a failure in the process, it triggers a workflow so that the teammates can work on those that require the work. So it's another example of how we're trying to use the automation and the bots and the AI to do a better job at getting that. And then the other piece that kind of falls on the back end of that is when we have a denial around an authorization, we're triggering smarter denial appeals based on the successes or failures that we've had in prior appeal efforts. And so those two pieces come together very nicely to help make the process more automated, but keep the teammates engaged in the work when the work needs to be done. So it's a two-way street. The work they're doing is harder, so the training that we have to do has got to be better, and the teammates have got to be prepared for both of those changes.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
The American Hospital Association put out in December a study that they ran during COVID, and one of the comments they made was is that the increase in denials over the last 3 years has been defined by those on the survey at 51%, saying that the increase in denials from their payers is very significant. Now, yesterday there was a comment made by Cinnamon that just basically talked about in 2021, are they trying to recoup the money they lost in under 2020? That was an interesting comment. I was like, whoa, I hadn't thought of that idea. Is this really occurring? You know, what are the shenanigans, you might say, of the payers in your market? What's going on? What are you seeing? Does it make sense, not make sense? Not quite sure. But as we start to look at automation, there is two different camps. There's an automation that really could occur on an enterprise level. In other words, you're buying and acquiring a toolbox to say, where's my opportunity? There's a great focus around that as we think about, okay, how do we, as your organization, you deploy automation. So there's a general purpose automation, and there's a lot of successes out there. And then there's this idea of a purpose-built RPA. And from our perspective, purpose-built RPA is really, really effective. The three guiding principles at the bottom, and I'll look this side so I can read it better, is augmented intelligence. In other words, you know kind of what it's supposed to do, where it's supposed to be, and there's a strong governance around that process. If that process is not firmly understood and understood what is a proper automation, what is a failure of an automation, it's important to know that. Specific use cases occur. And then thirdly, high volume, high value tasks. In other words, if I'm doing it a bunch of times, and because I can do it a lot of times and I can substitute it with an RPA process, the gain that I have is very substantial. If it's I don't have that often, it doesn't warrant the time for you to invest in RPA. You have a risk in that area. Whenever you're doing RPA, you've got to look at the top line. In other words, what is going on with that RPA process? RPA is based on a process. We think about machine learning and we think about AI, that is a process intelligence that is learning from the process. So it's based on data. A rules engine and machine learning has got to look at the RPA process and be able to do predictive work around it. You've got to be able to glean, why did it fail? Why did I have to go back to adjust? What is going on? What is the rule set that we have to create? Within our firm, within financial clearance, we have 1.5 million rules that are governing automation processes. This is a big task, but the automation creates an ROI that can be enormous. And I've had conversations with some of you in the room where you've been able to deploy RPA processes and had a great win. When we think about in the future, AI is right, healthcare is right for AI. There's a lot that we've done that's been very repetitive, and it's known to exist. We know exactly what that step is. So you think about your whole revenue cycle continuum, what are those opportunities, and where can they be? It's going to be something where you need to and have normalized data, and oftentimes we do. We have ANSI standards that are communicating between the HIS systems and the payers. We have standards by which we file for those claims. We have all kinds of standardized data that allow us to create an automation around certain functions. Do I want to automate something around claim status? What are we wanting to do there? And there's a wealth of data that's actually shared among healthcare providers. And so we think about that. Let me go back to this last slide here. Come on, work?
Yeah, I had trouble with that too.
Yeah, maybe it's the distance. I'll go slow. Come on now, work. Oh, there it is. Okay, so this is just a couple of areas where you might look at some of the areas within your revenue cycle and say, is there an opportunity for automation? Look at the gap of the opportunity that moved from 2016 to 2020 per the CAQH index. Look at the measurements they have made. There's some great opportunities where they were able to move the needle to a huge reduction. Look at the top line, eligibility benefit verification, something we've had for a long time. It starts to really move from, if it's manual, still in 2020, it's $5.3, but $5.30, but now in 2020 electronically, it's just at $2. Those are indexes we can start to look at. So when you think about those use cases, what are those in that list?
Yeah, wrap up. Oh, sorry, they just told us to wrap up.
Okay.
So yeah, we
got it.
Yeah, go
One
ahead.
last statement here I'll just make, and I'll hopefully get to the slide, is that RPA is here to stay. Last fall there was a report given. 94% of the hospital leadership are saying that RPA and AI is on their radar, and so I know a lot of you have that in motion. Feel free to reach out to us. We're going to stick around a little bit here for some comments and questions, but thank you all for your time, and I appreciate your attention.
Do we have time for questions, or okay? I wasn't sure whether you're saying okay.
Wrap it up now or later.
Yeah.
Okay, questions?
Questions?
First time I've asked a question in a while. Kempton, you talked about the data governance, I don't know if it's a board, a committee. Can you talk about a little bit about the makeup of that, and then how you and maybe some of your vendors, as subject matter experts, find a balance between what they expect and what the vendor may feel like they need to really adequately do their work?
Okay, so if the vendor is known to ask a lot of questions at HFMA conferences, they're ruled out. No, just kidding. We are, so our data governance committee is a team that includes IT professionals. It includes our privacy office. It includes the HIPAA folks and compliance as well. And what we are doing with that group is they establish, they will receive a request from a vendor, or we may have contracted with a vendor, and the data governance process then kicks in. They review the data that's being requested, what it's being used for, and it can be a lengthy process that we have to go through. Then once that is complete, they may say, we're not willing for you to send these data elements, go back to the vendor and ask them what the value is of these particular pieces, because we don't see that and we're going to remove that. So it's very, very ingrained. There is also, I understand that Revenue Cycle will have a seat at that table on data governance. And so we have a person that will be joining that group, and we'll know a lot more about it once we're sitting at that table. Good question. Yeah.
Great. All right, I think we're done at the session. I've gotten the notification that we're kind of in. So again, thank you all for your time. It's been great to be here. Thank you for everything. Yeah.